Chapter 11. 4 days later, Georgie and Jeannie were sitting in two chairs, squeezed together in front of a computer in the school library. Their whole class was there for an hour, and they were supposed to be looking for books for their projects. Georgie was pretty sure, though, that Jeannie had no idea how to use an online catalog. Type in Lincoln, Abraham, Georgie told her for the 40th time. Jeannie blew her thick brown bangs out of her eyes and typed in shoelaces. Then she pounded the keyboard when the computer screen informed her the search produced no results. She typed in rodents. Georgie felt like screaming. "Will you please let me do it?" he said. "No, wait," Georgie told him. "I found a lot of stuff this time." Georgie rolled his eyes. He'd been pretty upset when they'd been assigned Abraham Lincoln and not George Washington, but not nearly as upset as he was that he had to work with Jeannie the Meanie every Friday for 6 whole weeks. "Hey," Jeannie told him in a voice that was much too loud for the library, "did you know that there's a book called Mice Are Nice? We should check it out." "Jeannie, will you just let me type?" "Why are you going to look up books about shrimpazoids like you?" Georgie narrowed his eyes at her. "Something in your eye?" she asked. Before Georgie could tell Jeannie exactly how much he hated her, he noticed Mrs. Chinsky, the librarian, coming over to check on them. He snagged the keyboard out from under Jeannie's hands and started to type in Lincoln, Abraham, so they wouldn't get into trouble for goofing off. "And how's it going over here?" Mrs. Chinsky asked them. "Are you finding everything you need?" "Oh, yes," Jeannie said. "Did you know your library has 23 books about Abe Lincoln?" She pointed to the screen. Mrs. Chinsky smiled. "Well, I didn't know the exact number," she said. "It's 23, Jeannie told her. Georgie hated when Jeannie the Meanie acted nice in front of grown-ups. It made him want to barf. He clicked on the book entitled Abraham Lincoln, Born to Lead, and scribbled down where to find it. "Also, Mrs. Chinsky," Jeannie went on, "the library doesn't have any books about shoelaces. I checked." "Is that so?" Mrs. Chinsky replied. Georgie also hated when grown-ups acted like Jeannie the Meanie was funny instead of just mean. "Yeah," Jeannie said, "I think that you should get some." "Well, I'll look into that, Jeanette. Good luck with your project. Let me know if you two need anything." When Georgie had made a list of the books he thought might be helpful, he and Jeannie went over to the shelves to get them. As they passed through the reference section, Georgie scanned the shelves. He couldn't help it. Every time he was in the library, his eyes naturally drifted to a particular book. It was called Little in a Big World, and it was a book about dwarfs. He had been in the library for years, and Georgie was pretty sure that Mrs. Chinsky had gotten it because of him, like if kids wanted to check it out and learn about him or something. Georgie had flipped through it once. It had pictures of dwarfs in it, some who looked a lot like him and some who didn't at all. It talked about what it was like to be a dwarf and stuff that was hard and stuff that wasn't. Georgie had looked in the front of the book too, to see who had checked it out, and there were no names on the catalog card. At the time, he wasn't sure if that made him happy or not. Kind of stank to know that no one wanted to learn about him, but in a weird way it made him feel a little bit more normal too. Like maybe he wasn't different enough for people that people thought they should learn about him. It was sort of strange anyway, having a book about him in the library. No one else in the entire school had a book about them. Georgie didn't see the book on the shelf, but he didn't have much time to look either, because Jeannie was starting to drift off toward the section on rodents, and he knew if he didn't catch her quickly, they'd never get anything done. Georgie and Jeannie were allowed to check out only 2 books each, so they had to go through and decide which ones were the best. Actually, Georgie had to go through all of them because Jeannie just sat next to him on the round wooden table and doodled on the cover of her notebook with a pencil, humming loudly in his ear. She stopped humming just as the tip of her pencil broke on her notebook. She grabbed Georgie's pen from his hand. "Mind if I borrow this?" "Thanks." Georgie dug another pen out of his backpack and flipped through Lincoln, head and shoulders above the rest, trying to block out the sound of Jeannie's humming, but it was really hard. "Hey," she said, nudging him with her elbow. "Want to see what I'm drawing?" She held up her notebook, but Georgie didn't look. He turned a page in his Lincoln book and tried to learn about the 16th president. Jeannie nudged him again. "I asked if you wanted to see my picture," she said. Georgie didn't answer. "Are you deaf or something? Leave me alone." "I will when you look at my drawings." "I'm trying to read." Jeannie plopped her notebook down on top of Georgie's Lincoln book so he couldn't read. Georgie pushed the notebook aside. Hey, Jeannie said, just look at it. It's good. You'll like it. Why don't you read a book like you're supposed to? Because I'm trying to show you my art. Jeannie held the notebook in front of Georgie's face. Just look already. Georgie looked. On the cover of the notebook, Jeannie the Meanie had drawn a picture of their class. The students were standing in a long row, every one of them, and each picture was labeled with the person's name underneath it. And there, at the end, was Georgie. Short arms, fat head, and all. Georgie swatted the notebook away. Leave me alone, Jeannie. Jeannie flared her nostrils for a second and looked like she was going to say something mean, but instead she took up humming again. She put her foot up on the table and began writing on the rubber around the bottom of her shoe. For a second, Georgie found himself staring at her rat's nest of hair. Her sloppy ponytail was just off center, and Georgie wished that she'd fix it. It was really starting to bug him. Jeannie the Meanie was the only person in the world who could manage to have annoying hair. Georgie turned back to his book and tried to concentrate, but Jeannie's humming seemed to be getting louder by the second. Why couldn't he have a partner who actually did stuff? He was going to get stuck with all the work. He could tell right now, and when it was all over and they turned in their report, Jeannie the Meanie was going to smile at Mr. Myers and pretend like she'd actually helped. And only Georgie would know that all she'd really done was write on her shoe. He saw a flash of white hair in the corner of his eye and turned to see Russ and Andy selecting a book off the shelves. They weren't writing on their shoes. Georgie looked back at Jeannie. He could tell her now before things got out of hand. Jeannie, he'd tell her, you got to do stuff. I'm not going to do all the work. But what he ended up saying was, why did you write jaw on your shoe? Jeannie was now doodling a flower on the knee of her jeans. "'Cause that's my initials," she said. Georgie snorted and Jeannie's head shot up. "What?" she said. "Well, that's kind of dumb." "It's not," Jeannie huffed. She pulled her shoe up to her face to look at it more closely. "Is not," she said again, putting her foot back onto the floor. She looked up at him. "Why, what are your initials then?" Georgie shook his head. "I'm not telling." "Come on," she threatened him with his own pen. "I'll poke you." "No, stop it." "Then you better tell me." "No way." Jeannie raised the pen, poised and ready to jab Georgie in the arm. "Tell me." Georgie rolled his eyes at her. "No," he said. She glared at him for a second and then set the pen on the table. "Just tell me your middle name," she said. "No, and leave me alone. Mine's Anne." "I don't care." "Yours must be awful." Georgie could tell she was trying to draw it out of him. It wouldn't work. "Is it Hector?" "No." "Gerald?" "No." "Bartholomew?" "No." "Just help me look through these books, okay? I'm not going to do all the work, you know. You have to help too." "Fine." Jeannie grabbed a book from the middle of the stack so that 5 books toppled to the floor with a loud thud. Georgie could feel his face burn as everyone in the library turned to look at them. He quickly snatched the books up and piled them back onto the table. Jeannie sat calmly, puffing out her cheeks as she read. For about 20 minutes, Georgie thought things were going pretty well. He and Jeannie sat quietly, turning pages slowly and picking up new books every once in a while. Just as Georgie put the last book down, Jeannie tugged on his sleeve, and her face looked excited. "You find something interesting about Lincoln?" Georgie asked hopefully. Jeannie shook her head. "Nope," she said, "but I think I figured it out." "What?" She drew a long black line on Georgie's arm with his own pen and grinned at him. "Your middle name's Alfonso, isn't it?" Georgie pulled his arm away from her. "No," he hollered. "Will you shut up? I'm not going to tell you." He saw Mr. Myers looking at them from across the room, so he lowered his voice. "Anyway, we're almost out of time. Didn't you find anything yet?" Jeannie stared at him blankly. "About what?" she asked. "About Abraham Lincoln," Georgie said. "What was wrong with her? The guy you're studying." Jeannie nodded, and her off-center ponytail bobbed up and down. "Oh, yeah," she said. "I found out lots of stuff." "Like what?" "Like he was tall and ugly and wore a stupid hat." Georgie glared at her. "Great, thanks. That's really helpful." Jeannie didn't say anything, just went back to drawing the flower on her jeans. Well, Georgie said, picking two books off the table, I'm checking out these two books. You can pick whichever ones you want. When Georgie got to the librarian's desk, Mrs. Chinsky wasn't there, so he stood and waited. He noticed a metal cart that was stacked high with books, ready to be returned to the shelves, and he scanned the titles. Little in a Big World. Someone had checked it out. Georgie glanced at the left, then to the right, and as quick as he could, he snagged the book off the cart, turned to the inside cover, and pulled out the catalog card to look at the name, Jeanette Ann Wallace. Georgie snapped the book shut just as Mrs. Chinsky returned to her desk. Hi, Georgie, she said. Did you find some books you wanted to check out? He nodded and handed her the two books on Abraham Lincoln. While Mrs. Chinsky stamped, Georgie thought, why on earth would Jeannie the Meanie want to check out a book about him? She hated him. Mrs. Chinsky handed him his books, and Georgie went back to the table. He sat down next to Jeannie and looked at her closely. Should he say something? Should he tell her he knew? Jeannie was already drawing a snake on her jeans. Its head was reared back, jaws spread wide, ready to swallow the flower. Georgie was just opening his mouth to say something when the bell rang. Jeannie closed her book with a thud. Hey, Shrimpazoid, she said, you should close your mouth before you drool on yourself. And she stuck Georgie's pen in her pocket. Georgie just sighed and leaned back in his chair. That snake, he decided, had some seriously huge fangs.